Hello and welcome to Michael and Ivanka's Grand Podcast, a weekly podcast where we figure out how to do stuff and try and do something good every week and report back. Share some of our information that we've gleaned in our long lives on how to do well on stuff. My name's Michael Forrest.
This sounds like a really compelling episode. My name's Ivanka Magic.
And this week we're going to talk about how to make things that people like on the internet, mainly.
Internet things that people like.
We're not going to say any buzzwords. We're going to talk honestly and openly from our own experiences. I've made a viral video in my time that's got millions of views, so maybe that means that you might want to listen to me. But also I want to kind of broach this problem of how do you make something that is worthy and has values, and you're trying to kind of make a political statement perhaps, but is also appealing enough that people will sit through it or actually click on it in the first place.
I think we do know some stuff that might be useful, and also in talking about it under the guise of pretending to give advice we might draw some useful conclusions for ourselves, which will help us work out what we could or should be doing.
Exactly.
That's the idea.
How are you doing, Ivanka?
I'm doing okay. It's very rainy. Been out with my waterproofs with the child in a backpack.
I got very wet coming in this morning. My trousers are soggy and it's just a disaster. Luckily the rain's calmed down a bit, but you may hear a bit of it beating against my skylight. Have you managed to do some good deeds this week? Beyond your automatic ones, or including your automatic ones?
I don't know, is the honest answer.
Have you been thinking about it?
I've been thinking about it. I've been thinking about whether I should be doing that sort of mad, oh shit, I haven't done anything new, let's give some money to charity, which we've decided isn't necessarily a bad thing. So I have, I bought, my cousin who's staying with me, I bought her a reusable water bottle because she kept coming into my house with plastic bottles of water. It's like, this must end. Here you go. And I have switched my search engine to that one that plants trees.
Oh, what's that?
Ecosia? Don't know how you say it.
And is it of any use as a search engine?
Well, this is my problem. So I use, on my phone, I use DuckDuckGo, or have done, and I've now switched to the tree planting one. But I do every so often have to go google.com search because you're like, oh, come on, DuckDuckGo. Just because you're protecting my privacy doesn't mean you can't show me the things I want to see on the internet. Both DuckDuckGo and Ecosia rely on Bing, which is a different search experience. Then the other things I've done, these are very small things. I was walking back from nursery today and I was thinking, how many things more because I've been steadily changing my life for many years. And so it's like, what more can I do? Oh my, woe is me. We spent more money on our house in Croatia, putting all that insulation on the outside. We could have not done that. Things like that. But then you can always do more, I've decided. So, for example, I've always had green electricity. I switched to ecotricity because they proudly and loudly talk about being anti-fracking, and they talk about, so they're more than just an energy provider in my view. They actually put some extra work into trying to evangelize the use of clean energy. So they deserve some of my money. So those kind of things. But I didn't do that last week. I didn't. I'm stretching.
So here's an exercise. I was thinking about a point system for this.
Oh, yeah.
So we could start keeping score.
Right.
Maybe. And I thought I've come up with some sort of tentative scores for last week, and we can sort of discuss them for this week, for yours and mine.
Okay.
And then maybe we can start kind of thinking in terms of how many points we're accumulating. And you can sort of like put in your ones that you're doing automatically, like your electricity and enduring these dodgy search engines. But I quite like a sort of like +5, -5 scale. that's sort of kind of logarithmic. It's like an escalating scale. So 5 is like massive, but 1 is like, I did a little thing today. And then, so think of it like Uber stars, but there's also like negative Uber stars. So maybe it's not, or maybe it's like Grand Theft Auto wanted stars more than anything else.
Never
so
played it.
If you get like 1, the police will run after you. If you get 2, they'll start shooting at you. If you get 4, they'll be like, helicopters flying around like chasing after you. If you get 5 stars, the army's out, there's tanks. So that sort of like escalating scale, I think was what was in the back of my mind when I thought of this scale. Wanted stars, I guess, is one way, and then Uber stars is the other way.
So for example, last week when I talked about the fact that I had to buy a plastic bottle of water,
so I've given you -1 for that tentatively.
Okay, fair enough.
Right? And then because you mentioned buying a disposable coffee, -1. And then -1 for taking a taxi. But then you got +1 for stopping a mansplaining cabbie and discussing plastics. And I maybe gave you a +1 for that. I don't know if you feel that's reasonable. I was not sure what you should get for persuading your mother to join Extinction Rebellion. Maybe 2, maybe 3. What do you think?
2. My mum's
I gave you
an easy
2.
target.
I settled on 2. Volunteering with the kids, I gave you a +3.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 for your charity organisation stuff that you've been working on.
Ooh,
so that
I did
means
quite well.
Your net score last week was 6, 7, 8, 7, 6, 5, like +5. I think I was probably harsher on myself. I gave myself -5 for failing to help the person screaming outside, but I think that's probably just an emotional thing. But I'm going to say -3.
I don't know.
Or maybe it is -5.
Given where you live and your examples of like living in Brixton and, living on a road where people do get up to all sorts of shenanigans of an evening, and it could have been, I think there is a contextual score here. So I think it should be more like, what's the difference between me interrupting a mansplaining taxi driver and you not responding to somebody? I think it's partly that I'd resolved to try and intervene in something like that, and then like maybe if I hadn't been planning on keeping an ear out for that sort of thing and I don't know, I think maybe I would I wouldn't even notice and I wouldn't give myself a negative score, but because I was specifically supposed to be thinking about that sort of thing, I've been a bit harsh on myself. But I had -5 before, but I think that's just me being stupid. By that logic, I should have -5 for buying a plastic bottle of water because I actively seek to not do that.
Okay, all right. So, well, let's give me what should we give me for that then? -1? Okay, I was very tired. All right, thank you.
It's not because you're tired.
That
wasn't the reason for your score.
I still feel like... Anyway, there's a minus for that.
Okay.
But then also because I wasn't paying attention to as many things, it's almost like you've kind of deducted points for a lot of things you noticed that you didn't do, whereas I probably did buy a plastic bottle last week but wouldn't have thought to give myself a negative point for it. So I don't know. I think there's a sort of certain frame of reference to these scores that it's hard to know if they can be directly compared. But I just want to see how it pans out. I gave a decent chunk to that Yemen charity. So I gave myself maybe +4 is a bit high. Certainly +3, I think. It was a quarter day's work, basically.
Wow.
So
yeah, then if it's a quarter day's work, then
like a couple of hours of equivalent of my work. So I think that's pretty good
I think that's pretty good. So I think that's what did you say, 3?
Yeah, 3 I think is acceptable there.
Yep.
Okay, so that means I've got a net score of +2 versus your +5.
Game on, Michael?
Yes, indeed. And then this week you've got your reusable water bottle purchase. What do you want for that?
I think 1.
And then the search engine stuff. I'll give you 1 for doing that.
I think if you do any sort of positive action, that's what a 1 is.
Yeah. Like it can be the smallest thing. If it's a thing that you had to do... actively do. Well, you had to go and buy... Did you have the water bottle already?
No, I had to actually buy one.
I
went and bought it from a charity.
I think you're going to get 2 for that because you actually had to go and do something and think about something. So it was like you had to actively go and do something and then give it to someone. And that's obviously more than just talking to someone or doing something. So I'm going to give you 2 for that.
Oh, thank you.
I hope this isn't too boring sounding.
I know, I'm trying to decide if it is boring.
Yeah,
but I'm enjoying it.
But it is fascinating, right? I think
It
everyone likes knowing what score they're getting. So, and I think we're discussing what the scoring system is now, and we won't have to keep discussing it. People can come back to this episode and kind of go, okay, what were the scores? This week, I decided if I'm working basically full time, I'm not going to give myself a hard time about not actively doing charitable works, but I am going to consistently give to charities.
Okay.
So, and I'm thinking like by kind of setting that quite aggressively high. So this week I did like a quarter day's work again in charitable donations, even though I only worked 3 days. But anyway, that's beside the point. But I think then that will also motivate me to find ways of saving that money by actually just doing something in real life when I'm not working or when I have got a bit more time. So if I set the bar quite kind of high for that, then that's my theory this week. So I gave to 2 different charities this week. I did like 3 spots for crisis, kind of Christmas homelessness support, Christmas, whatever they were doing. And I also donated to Best for Britain, who've got some Brexit stuff going on. So basically the stuff that passed in front of my eyes, I donated to this week.
Fair dues.
So that's done. So I'm going to give myself a +3 again and leave it at that.
We're not counting the stuff you're doing anyway.
Well, I think we can. And I think once we've got an automated system...
once Michael's written us some software...
I mean, I've kind of written it, but like I've never really had the conversation with another person where we try and figure out what we should get. But I think it would be, you should get a recurring point for your electricity every week. And a recurring, like, I think those recurring things are just, they've got to be done. And the more of those we can put together, the better. So there we go.
I think there's an interesting conversation about, can they be directly compared? I had a long chat with a friend yesterday. We haven't spoken to each other for ages. We sat on the phone and actually had a proper old school chat. And we were talking about the fact that we've both kind of used up our flying carbon footprint for life and probably for a few lifetimes, if truth be told. So for me, who's got family far away in another country, even though most of the time we take the time to drive there and take our time getting there, occasionally I have to fly, or I do fly. Maybe I don't have to. I'm constantly looking at how to do, I'm sort of reviewing, like we're going skiing this year, but we're going to drive to the ski resort. 3 of us in a car, lots of gear. We decided that was the better way to do it. But then, as my friend was saying, if you're the kind of person that does 3 flying holidays a year, why don't you just cut one out? Like the context of me, who's actively been trying to change my life for probably 20 years, with some negative blips around, certainly around fashion spending. But I've always done lots of things that have been environmentally conscious. For me to, shout out my window, are you okay? For me, that's far more easy than for you. So, do we get points?
I think we should be rewarded for good habits. But, I want to see what this looks like as we start keeping track. But now that there's points...
Yeah.
Like, maybe you'll kind of notice more stuff. I've had a very good week.
Yay!
After all my hand-wringing about my video production last week, I managed to get it out like a couple of days late, but it's actually gone down really well. I've got like 3,000 or 4,000 views in the first 24 hours and just resounding positive comments, like loads of new subscriptions on like more Facebook likes on my page in the last couple of days than in the last couple of years.
Really?
And like my YouTube's up to like 850 now from 750. I'm approaching the 1,000 that I need for that. I've also got a new nephew has been born.
Oh, a new nephew's been born.
Cute little baby. I like.
really
It's funny
exciting.
how these babies look so unimpressed when they come out. It's like, and I'm right there with them. Like my little niece, she was like, I'm like, yeah. That is the correct reaction to this world. What the hell? I just feel like the babies are just like, what is this fresh bullshit? Like every 20 minutes, like discovering some new, completely unreasonable thing to deal with. So I'm not surprised they do a lot of crying. And also, I went to visit someone yesterday who's setting up a studio space with a big performance space in like adjoined to this youth centre, like 5 minutes from my flat, less than that, on my bike. I'm excited about it if I can make it happen. It's got a little kind of recording booth in a bigger room. So there'll be like one or two other artists in the room, and then I can kind of work in or outside my little audio production space, depending on what I'm doing, and kind of pay attention to what's going down there. Maybe do some stuff with the kids. I don't know. And because it's funny because they've had this music program in the past, but then they kind of ran out of money, and there's all this like high-end audio equipment just kind of sitting there. But it'll be half the rent that I'm paying on my current studio, and a lot more kind of social and a lot more opportunities for collaboration and stuff.
Wow.
There we go. That's very exciting.
Week.
It's been good. And yeah, I finished up my contract that was hurting me as well. It's exciting. Good week after some whinging weeks.
Very happy for you.
Right, you clicked on this podcast because you want to know tips. 5 tips for going viral with Michael and Ivanka.
Tip 1, do stuff.
We're talking about putting stuff on the internet that people will pay attention to. Click on, share, enjoy. So there are 2 parts of that. What kind of content are we talking about there? And then how do you give that the best chance of succeeding? So I think case in point, ContraPoint's climate change video titled The Apocalypse.
That this week. Yeah.
So title The Apocalypse. Now, I love ContraPoints because she has this sort of Lynchian, like very sort of like, I don't know what you call it, very stylish presentation. Yeah. Like a lot of work goes into it, into the audio, into the picture. And then it's obviously like a lot of kind of costuming going on. So it's just very kind of like...
It's a performance.
Yes, it's a performance, but also... always about very kind of subjects that you might not want to think about, like, or just might seem a bit hard. So she's coming from a philosophy background and is conscious that if you just start kind of spewing the names of philosophers at people, their eyes are going to glaze over. Well, if you haven't even read this, then how can I even talk to you? It's kind of the attitude of academics a lot of the time. Yeah. So this climate change video was the first time that personally, I have internalized this 1.5 degree thing, or the -4 degrees. So -4 degrees change is the last ice age. We're heading for like plus multiple degrees, but if we kind of turn around now, we can maybe keep it to 1.5 degrees, and that's like the goal. And then editing the podcast after listening, I was like, oh yeah, Ivanka's talking about that all the time, but I just didn't really realize what that was. I mean, it was a very sort of self-aware video in terms of, I know you don't want to think about this, I'm going to field those kind of objections to that. So there's like a video within a video. Yeah. But just to try and make you watch it at the same time, knowing that you're going, well, there's nothing I could do. Blah, blah, blah. So I thought that was a pretty successful, certainly in terms of my attention, worked very well.
I hadn't watched a ContraPoints video before, despite the fact that you talk about her all the time. Yeah. But I did watch that one, and there was a lot of respite in it. Because of the video style, there was like, here's a really difficult topic, here's a bit of really nasty medicine, and now let's have some champagne. And then back to the difficult topic. So
you've got a worthy subject.
Yeah.
You've got a political stand you want to make. I mean, a lot of production went into that, but that's one way of getting people to watch it. I don't know what the view count is on that video, because it may be
hundreds of thousands.
Right. I think it may be one of those things that I like.
No, and I also saw it come up separately. Obviously, it's on it's the Extinction Rebellion feed, so of course they're connected. Like they're going to use content like that.
That's cool.
But I did see it come up somewhere separately. But I do that. I mix and match the stuff I put, because actively put stuff on Facebook all the time, and I think I'm getting a bit more focused about it. So I do kind of go, and here's a nice story about how we can grow coral, and here's a story about how the world is coming to an end. Oh, and here's a story.
I mean, from I have to say, like, from someone that maybe isn't as focused on the subject, it's all kind of like, here's subject. Climate stuff.
Oh God, it's Ivanka banging on about climate stuff.
So, again. But then that's me. I don't know if that's everybody.
Yeah.
Sorry. What do you?
Right.
So, but I want to say something useful about that. I think for it to feel like a kind of mixture of content, you'd have to throw in a few more like Vic and Bob videos, like, some actual. This is just nonsense stuff.
So I interviewed this campaigner as part of my research. He campaigns on quite a difficult topic. He describes the fact that he comes from a investigative journalism background. So what he talks about, he knows to be true. And he was a very serious person. He was very charismatic. He was very high energy, but he was very serious. He's not looking... I am not funny. I might be funny with my friends down the park. I'm not a comedian. And my objective is not to entertain people, but I have often had aspirations to motivate people to do something. So, for example, feedback I've had in my work, I had somebody I worked with at LB, I was leaving, and I took her out for lunch. I was like, go on, can I have the feedback of there's the Ivanka doing an Ivanka thing again. She said, one of the things about you is that you have a visceral emotional reaction to what's going on around you. And that is a strength and a weakness. It means that when I think someone's an idiot, very, very hard for me to disguise what I think.
Yeah,
equally, when I am motivated and feel passionately about something, nobody can doubt for a second that I am motivated and passionate about that thing. Or one of the things I do try and do, because I do have skills in this area, is to try and work out what the difference is, whether this gets action, did somebody like it, click it, share it, and what are the things that don't get any engagement, and what are the things that actually prompt a conversation where somebody I know go, oh yeah, I was listening to that thing, or I read that thing you talked about, and now I've done X. That's my answer to your Facebook is full of climate change stuff. Of course it is.
Sorry, I know. I think it's, when you are inside something and very focused on something, you see a lot more variation in it. So it's like when you come to a new genre of music, it all sounds the same. But to someone that listens to a lot of that music, it's like, no, what are you talking about? This is wildly different.
Yeah. Where you started was consistency.
Yes, but
I often get people going, I finally listened to your podcast. Which is like, you've been banging on about your podcast for a year, and I've been seeing, the things come up on my feed, and I've finally given in and clicked on them. There is this thing from a marketing advertising point of view. Somebody needs to see your thing, your brand, your work for 7 to 10 times before they will actually consider taking an action. And there is something about the sort of scattergun. Scattergun is not good. There's consistency versus scattergun, which I think is interesting.
So what's an example of scattergun?
Like, I don't know.
My approach to everything for the past several years, probably.
An example of scattergun, I think, is just that sort of like mad burst and then nothing for ages. Or, I don't know, having some sort of consistency of quality or message, makes a enormous difference. So again, one of the things I've learned from doing the interviewing on this project is that you don't really know. Nobody really knows what will make somebody take an action or not.
And that's something we should probably have made clear from the very top. There are no rules to any of this.
No,
it's like if you think you spot a pattern, then forget about it. Cause
you've imagined it.
Or if there is one, then 1,000 other people are going to kind of rinse that dry and ruin it before you can kind of get something done. And it's just going to that's not how it works.
No. So there's like, your video that went viral. I remember us talking about it previously where, you're not sure which particular action was the thing that made it snowball. Is that true?
So the Graham Dunning mechanical techno video that I did, that we shot. He had first I said, look, we've got to have a script for this because I don't want to waste any time. And then he went away and sort of sketched out this idea, which was like a vague sort of parody of one of these sort of school, well, it's kind of like Look Around You style. If you've heard of that, I'll link to it. And we just shot that very carefully. It was kind of boring. It was like I cut it as tight as possible, but it was all very sort of measured and sort of boring. And it was quite a long video. But we just paid a lot of attention to detail. And in the audio, we kind of did this Foley with this little pencil kind of going across the page. And when I just was mixing it, I just went and panned the sound across as the pencil went across. And then that ended up being like going viral because of the ASMR community taking it up on Reddit, and loads of people just really loving these kind of quiet little sounds that make your head tingle got into it, and it, you know, millions of people watched it. And also like the subject matter was interesting. Because, you know, the Graham Dunning does this, he stacks these records one above the other, and each has sort of drum triggers triggered by it. So one will trigger the kick drum, and one will trigger the hi-hats, and another a synth. And it's called mechanical techno, and what's good is that it sort of suits the musical style as well. In terms of him doubling down on that kind of came from him putting some little Instagram video up and that going weirdly popular, and he got a gig at quite a good venue straight away out of just sharing some little experiment he was doing. And he does loads of different stuff, but he's ended up kind of getting known for this, and especially off the back of that video is, you know, he's getting booked a lot. A subsequent project that we did, they got a grant for this much more ambitious project, the Mammoth Beat Organ, and they brought me in to produce 3 videos on that. And what's been interesting about that is that the work they've done on it is like even more crazy than the previous one, and I just think it's fascinating. But the reason it hasn't gone viral, I think, is because it's sort of, and some of the comments that people make on YouTube, they're really angry about the fact that it doesn't really sound like music that they would listen to. It sort of sounds like out-of-tune recorders being blown in school or something. And that sort of makes them very angry that so much work has been done on something that the music itself is sort of like, it's a little bit on the kind of avant-garde, anything goes. Compare that to this marble video where there's all these marbles coming down playing the music. The music is very sort of easy and recognizable, and has a bass line and chord sequences and a tune, in a way that this is much more kind of abstract and sort of coming out of a sort of noise tradition that's pretty niche in terms of the internet. It did all right, but it never obviously broke through that thing of people that have a tolerance and experience with music that isn't the sort of music you hear on the radio or whatever, Spotify. But, you know, as we were doing it, we were, you know, hoping for a similar result again. So in that sense, I suppose, like anything that kind of like slows it down is necessarily going to kind of ruin its chances.
I mean, there is something, what you were saying about it being easy to listen to and consume. You know, the reason people share these things like going, you know, the home is where the cake is, is because you're not really going to offend anybody. So you share this bullshit on your Instagram or your thing, it's like, oh, today, take a walk, smile at the stranger, whatever. You're like, yeah, everyone goes, yeah, man, that's beautiful. But actually, the kind of things that you and I want to put out into the world aren't necessarily comfortable.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're not cosy. And I don't really know what the answer is at all.
I don't think there is. I think it's fine. And that's why I think that ContraPoints video was so interesting.
But I wonder how many people watch that, because it's still edgy. It still has an edge. And it's like, I mean, I don't think her target audience is, you know, Rust Belt white American. But how do we get the you know, difficult messages to Rust Belt American? I don't know.
Well, maybe it is that kind of early adopter, long tail mentality. Maybe we need to, you know, it's one of these things where you can't really target the mainstream. You've got to target the early adopters. And then that sort of like then becomes fashionable, and you get these, you know, these humps of adoption that people put graphs of. Whether or not, I mean, trouble is you never know if the hump's going to go up and down and up again. It's sort of like,
I certainly, in having this conversation with you, am not thinking about how to promote some sales thing.
No.
Like, at all. I'm thinking about, and what you were saying about having a worthy message and how to get it across. You know, if nothing else happens off, you know, from having this conversation on this podcast, if a few more people share more tricky messages or bother to engage in them, that would be a good outcome as far as I'm concerned. I think one of the things that always surprises me with things like, so the ContraPoints one, I did go and look at the view count, and it was high. It wasn't millions, it had gone over 100,000 or maybe 3. It was not insignificant by any stretch of the imagination. But then there's lots of other things like that. Greta Thunberg, the Greta Thunberg, her Twitter account, her Facebook. I mean, I don't know if she sees herself as being the kind of the person to follow, but I'm always amazed by how few followers she has. I don't know if that matters.
Well, I mean, if you want to influence people, it does matter.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Like, it's all very well talking to a small set of people. The thing is, the people we love... So in the same way that you've got Greta Thunberg, I have my musical heroes, Mouse on Mars, I kind of I finally get them to tweet something that I've done. And to me, that's the biggest deal in the world because they're my favourites. And I've got this disproportionate idea of how significant they are in the world. And then I kind of like actually look at their Twitter followers and it's like, oh, actually, yeah, okay, never mind. That's not going to make any difference. I mean, to me, it's hugely meaningful. It's hard because someone that you really fall in love with, it can actually be pretty specific and pretty niche. And in some ways it has to be, doesn't it? I mean, do people feel that same level of love and engagement for people that aren't quite specific?
Greta Thunberg, I think, is an example for me of someone that I think more people should be more impressed with. So most of the time I sort of retweet her and talk about her. I probably say something about her once a week because I think she's cool and I think she's doing something very powerful and that people should check her out. Last week, we watched that Andrew Sims guy talk at Meaning, and he was one of the talks that I was quite taken with, and we were both impressed with his sort of delivery and his passion. So they've launched rapidtransition.org. They launched this rapid transition project. I'm not entirely sure what the project is, but I've been trying to engage with them on Twitter. Now, I mean, I think I may need to put in a bid for a few points for my sort of online engagement with other people's stuff. But so I'm not entirely sure what they want you to do. They seem to be collecting stories of people doing rapid transition stuff. And I did get a response from one of my, I tweeted at them or mentioned them or something. But they've got very few followers. And I feel like they should be engaging with me more. Right,
given that they've not got that many people to engage with.
Like, you've got nobody, I got loads, let's combine this effort, shall we?
Well, I forget that you're a social media maven with all your Twitter. How many have you got?
Well, not that many.
You've got a few.
8,000,
that's pretty good.
I don't know how many of them follow me.
But a lot of them have followed you as a result of that Trump thing. So they know what you care. They haven't just followed you for some random thing that they've seen. They're kind of following you for you, which I think is a really big deal.
I've not thought about it like that.
Yeah, no, because you can.
Yeah, I suppose it is. Yeah,
because you could get 6,000 followers by just kind of paying some Indian company to kind of click farm it, and that's knowing. I mean, that's the other side. You can always pay for this stuff, but it's completely meaningless because no one will ever see your stuff. But like, if you get people on board with the thing, like the hardest thing is to get people engaging with what you're doing for the reasons that you want them to. And I think because, you sort of spoke up for climate change to Trump, a lot of people followed you knowing that. And that's kind of what, that's what you're about, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think that's really good. Whereas you could kind of do something viral. Like I had a viral experience a few years ago where I made this dickheadometer where there was that song that went around, I love my life as a dickhead, and I just took each line. I was like, I feel like some of those things apply to me. So I made this little online questionnaire. It's before that kind of took off as a big thing, but I just made this thing that asked you each line asked you each thing and then gave you a dickhead score at the end, and kind of ended up crashing my server out because so many people were doing it and it was just going around everywhere. But I mean, it's a throwaway thing and it can't lead to anything else.
No.
Unless my thing is about criticising hipsters or not. Which I don't really care. It's like you can have an idea that will become popular, but if it's completely divorced from your values or like anything you want to pursue.
Yeah.
So I think this podcast is good because we're being consistent in taking a line that we can follow up, and we want to accumulate, even if it's slow to accumulate listeners, we know that the people that are listening for the right reasons and will hopefully be on board with us in the future.
Yeah.
And won't just unsubscribe as soon as we say something about the subject that they're like uncomfortable with.
One thing that is quite interesting, for example, there is a Brett Kavanaugh on Twitter, and he tweeted something, it's not a great day to be called Brett Kavanaugh or something, and his actual tweet has had loads more engagement than my tweet,
right,
on the measure of on the twittometer.
But that tweet was just a funny tweet, right? It didn't have any
worthy,
it didn't have any message to it, so it's easier to like, isn't it?
But what he didn't get, I got, just to boast, that tweet got me in print.
Yeah.
I made it onto the news. I was on BBC World News, on Skype. By that time of the evening, I was like, whatever. But I did have a deliberate moment, and I think that sort of deliberateness of message, because I think if we have a deliberateness of message, it is, please do something. Doing nothing is not an option anymore. Being clear, like the morning of that Trump tweet, I was sitting there and I made a conscious decision that I wanted to go on, speak to Piers Morgan and say climate change. That was my, okay, I'm going to do this because I want morning TV to have somebody say climate change, and it's going to be me. The deliberateness of message of this podcast is we want to make sure we're doing enough, and by being public in that, hopefully we'll encourage more people to do more. I don't know how this helps with the topic of our but there's something about clarity of goal that is really important.
The consistency is the snowball. Like if you're not kind of consistent with what your values, with what you're doing, it can't accumulate. It's just like you're throwing a load of little snowballs in every direction, which I'm definitely guilty of. But partly because the other side of this, and going back to Graham, is like he was throwing a lot of snowballs and then one started rolling down the hill and he was like, okay, well, I'm going to focus on that one. Even though sometimes it's like, I kind of wish I could do some of my other stuff as well. You do have to throw a lot of shit at the wall as well.
Yeah.
But
yes, you do. You do. Yes, you might have to throw a lot of shit at the wall, as you put it. But like things that do help is if it's decent quality. Yeah.
So production values, quality, it being evident that you put some time into this can make a big difference. So sometimes you can just kind of do something quickly and it happens to take off. But the amount of work you put into something is absolutely in no way an indicator of how well it will be received.
No, not at all.
And this is the heartbreaking thing about this sort of thing.
And yeah, definitely. And one of the things you sort of have to accept is that despite all your hard work and effort and quality and polish, it's just not going to be the thing that people get excited about. I mean, I know we said we weren't going to use acronyms and stuff, but people talk about SEO and search engine optimization. And there are things that you should do to make sure your user experience of your website is good and that it's fast, and that will help search engine optimization. But truthfully, the thing that so for Restaurants Brighton, the more as it's got better, we've been able to make it more better. It's like as it improves, you can then spend more money on better content. Then you can better video. Like the first incarnation of the website had whatever photos restaurants sent us. Right, which were very varied in quality. And so Nick actively went on a photography course and bought a better camera and then got into food photography himself and pays people to do food photography, and it's not always easy. It's not always like one of the reasons we don't have guests is this is what we can do. We can afford to do it, and we can do it, and it is a good enough quality that we're happy to listen to. But to get a guest involved starts getting more complicated to keep up the sort of. So it's
we don't want to do that dodgy low quality phone conversation thing. I kind of care about the audio fidelity being pretty good on this.
Last week we were talking about procrastination and the fact that also perfect is not the aim.
Yeah, and this is why I've been so excited this week Yeah, and definitely that perfectionism thing is that I set myself a month goal, and it was a struggle to get that video out, and I kind of missed my deadline, and I spent a whole day of just basically trying to do something, and then it just turned into, that was just a learning day. I was trying to figure out how much I could achieve in a day, kind of thing, and I didn't really know before then. I've done a lot of stuff, but in terms of the style I was trying to do, I think if I hadn't given myself that deadline that I have to put something out now, I could easily have spent so much longer on that video that I released this week. And a lot of it might have been to its detriment as well. So I might have gone too detailed on one fact or another, or I might have, like, my diagrams aren't accurate because I kind of like drew the diagram and then I had to just get the thing working properly now that I'd shown how to make it. And then there's a load of stuff like it needs an opto coupler and this and that. But it wasn't really important to the video. I came up with a technique that allowed me to kind of produce a video. Really, the value of it comes from the work that I've put in to figure out the project. And then, like, the editing and voiceover and all that stuff shouldn't really be a big deal, but that can end up being quite time-consuming because I can't just drill through my plate. I've got to set up a light on it and point the camera at it and find an angle that looks all right and then drill that and hope that I don't mess up the thing in the process of drilling it. But what's been amazing since that is I released that video. It's like, it's good enough, and actually is to a pretty good standard. I'm already, like, nearly finished the next one. Because now I've got a technique and I've got something that I feel like I can keep going. I've even built myself a tool to kind of make that more streamlined. So I can write my script in...
You built yourself a tool?
I built myself a tool, Forrest. Me. Like, I can write my script and then I can turn that into, like, a checklist in my video editing program, and it just lays it out, record the voiceover, and then it's just, okay, I just need to fill in all these shots and I'm done. I had to have that deadline to force myself to do the first one. I made the commitment about the monthly thing, which seemed like quite a long time. Yeah. But given how much else is going on, so I'm quite happy to be able to keep doing that now, and I've got a technique and I've got a flow, and I wouldn't have got to that if I hadn't given myself that hard deadline of I've just got to, and it was painful. You know, you heard me last week. I was like, just at the end of my tether. I was so, like, frustrated with myself because I was like, how do I get this thing out?
That video is very snacky. It's very easy to consume. Because you have not let detail and accuracy get in the way of a good story. Yeah. Basically, it's like, oh, well, it's not exactly correct, but anyone who actually wants to have a go at building that thing can get in touch with you.
Exactly.
I don't.
Is it? But you can.
So I was quite amused to watch the video. I thought it was clever, you know, like it was cunning and clever, you know. So it's just cool, isn't it, really? It's just like, wow, I don't know why anyone would want to do this, but good on you, you know, that kind of. It's easy to watch. There's nothing like...
nothing wrong with it, obviously. Like, even the music, I made a decision to make it pretty, like, don't make it too interesting musically. Kind of, like, use it, the benefits of the thing, but make it like really kind of dry sounding techno.
In a way, I expected more music. You know, like if I had anything, I was like, oh, but
well,
I
didn't have time to put more music in. That's the problem with that. I kind of recorded what I recorded.
Maybe you could have a how-to like that one, and then a little bit of music as a separate video. Well,
my next video, I actually had like a 5-minute video of me performing it because someone else helped me on that one. So the next one is very much going to have a performance as a sort of separate video. And at some point, I was just all I had time to do was what you see, and then I had to go home and cook dinner, and like it was like literally that was after like 3 or 4 days later. I was like, I could probably, but if people are asking for it. And people have started asking. So that's that's such a win for me. And you're right, it's the story, isn't it? Like, and that's not even how I was thinking about it at all. But
that's what it is. It's like when you're if you want to tell a story of how you did something and you want people to laugh, you don't need to tell them. You need to tell the details that make the story, not that, oh, and then on my way there I was wearing a pink jacket with some yellow shoes. It's like, is that relevant story?
Well, it's like comedians will go, oh, yesterday this happened to me. Well, actually, no, it didn't happen to me. It was like a couple of years ago, actually, and actually it didn't happen to me, it happened to someone else, and actually I actually made up most of it. Like they'll sometimes kind of break that thing because like to tell a story you just And I do that more now, like, oh, kind of what's the quickest way to say this? Let's not get... But it's easy to get bogged down in the detail, isn't it, when you're telling a story?
One of my favourite quotes in the whole world ever is that, I'm sorry this letter is so long, I didn't have time to write you a shorter one.
Yes.
And it is that sort of like, get everything out, and then I don't need that, don't need that. But that's hard. That is hard, I think.
In terms of writing, things like that, some good tips on that is write a whole draft in one go. Like a lot of people will, you'll kind of like start it and then you'll think, oh, well, I'll finish that later. But this is a piece of advice from Dan Harmon, like write a whole draft in one sitting and then review that, because if you sort of like stop halfway through, you will never get into that same flow that you were in. So I think the fact that I just kind of sat down and wrote 3 or 4 pages in final draft, and that was the script, and then just recorded it and then did it all, meant that it was sort of like in that one tone, whereas the alternative is you have all this footage and you try and kind of assemble it in an appealing way, which can then just end up taking weeks and weeks and weeks. You're trying to find the story in the footage, which is a completely different thing, really. But I think what means it's the same for reports that you're writing. It's the same for, if you were to write like a screenplay or something.
Interesting TED video this week that Christian Giordano sent me, and it was I'll share it, but it was basically a science journalist who's been talking about climate change for the last 20 years, whatever, talking about the way forward. And he talks about the fact that in all his time of covering this kind of reporting as a journalist in the science, there are 2 schools of thoughts, and he calls them wizards and prophets. Prophets are people who think that the climate crisis can be solved by all of us going smaller and having little communities that make their own solar power and knit their own socks. And then you've got the wizard community that think it all has to be solved by technology, and we're all going to live in these highly, I think it's dystopian. You can see which side of the more life fall on. This sort of future where we're living up in the air and the earth has been poisoned, but we are alive and we are living, but everything is enabled by technology.
But where does these bio buildings, like where it's kind of along the lines of nature and trees are integrated, all that kind of stuff, special architecture? That's
100%. So this is the thing that I like. His conclusion is that actually everyone needs to stop rowing about whether it's going to be the prophets or the wizard's future. The future that would be the best future and the most achievable future is the one where they combine. He had urgency at the end of his presentation. It was like, we need civil disobedience. That's the only way to get full social change. So kind of big tick to the Extinction Rebellion community, but also to the things, exactly what you're talking about, like living walls. We've got all this technology. There's no point pretending it doesn't exist. It's here. It's enabling us to have this conversation. It is a platform where you can reach more people. Things can organise. A petition can get signed in minutes to have actually something debated in Parliament, which would have previously taken ages, if ever. Using these platforms, these social media platforms, and using technology and video production technology and sharing and all these kind of podcasts and everything is all part of the solution. Even if on the surface of it, it's not. Technology
got us in this mess. I really think it needs to pull its weight again, because I certainly don't see backwards as an option. But no. I mean, not that that's what, I don't know.
I mean, that's the difficult thing about transport and flying. Flying's here. We're used to flying. We want to fly places. I think we just need to be more considerate about when and how we do it. Like, my favourite, Greta Thunberg, she talks about, they wanted to fly her to some sort of an award ceremony. She's like, we should only be flying in an emergency. Yeah, but, feeding your family is an emergency. If you've got to fly for work, what are you supposed to do? So, I'm not saying skiing is an emergency. I'm not saying holiday is necessarily emergency, but
You're not saying
I
skiing
think
is an emergency.
Well,
Well, that's very generous.
but you know what I mean? It's very hard. It's like, what's my emergency and what's your emergency?
My brain is overflowing with stress and I need to go skiing. It is an emergency, you know?
The trickiness of the current moment in our history is that you can't do nothing.
You can't do nothing.
Did something.
Yeah. Well, this is why I quite like the idea of making it competitive altruism, competitive caring. I think, I don't know, I want to hear from listeners as well. Like, is that if we can like score each other, I don't know, I think it makes it a bit more. People care about all sorts of meaningless stuff.
This is where the blockchain comes in.
No, the blockchain.
We could make it into a cryptocurrency app where you put your score forward and then it gets blockchained.
Okay, maybe. I don't know.
But yeah, I think having I'm up for being scored. I'm already pleased I beat you last week.
Well, exactly. There you go. Now I've got something to kind of like. I've got like a level. It's like, oh God, I've only done 3 points this week, and she's going to definitely get 5. It'd be good if I could kind of see your progress throughout the week.
Well, that's
so
right.
I knew
Having it in a MyFitnessPal calorie counting shared thing where you can go, oh shit, or the steps or whatever.
Well, maybe I could like do a version of it for just the two of us to start with. That would save me a lot of having to design things and like think about onboarding and all that kind of stuff. And maybe we could kind of like bootstrap something that way, because I have a lot of the technology already. It's just like I needed to sell it and market it and like actually commit to it. Yes. Done good.
Good.
Couple of points I wanted to make, and it's something you've touched on, but to sort of succeed on the internet as, I don't know, anything you want to do, photography is actually really important. Even if that's just what your profile picture looks like on Twitter. I think like having a professional, and I read this on something, but actually having a professional looking profile picture on Twitter kind of changes people's perception of you straight away. If it's like some selfie or if it's some holiday photo, it's just a different sort of thing then. So so I've told you this before. But it's quite hard. It's quite involved. I had to decide, am I going to start spending thousands of pounds on this equipment to be able to film stuff? But I made the decision to sort of go down that road because like really as soon as you're digital, as soon as you're online, like all that people are going to see is that photography, is those videos. And you got to learn how to light stuff. You've got to get a camera that like different lenses have different effects. Like there's a lot of craft and skill that goes into that photography thing that can make, once in a while a lo-fi video will get popular, but most of the time what's going to break your very interesting project or your very interesting idea is going to have a certain amount of production value. And that's not necessarily something you can achieve on your phone. To compound that, even video, like on your phone, can be perfectly good enough as long as your sound is really good. And that's a whole art in itself. And it's only recently that I've even managed to get a studio where I feel like I can mix stuff that I know it will sound good on other people's, that I know how it will sound everywhere. And that's a whole craft and art form. And like if you record something on your phone's mic, it's going to sound awful, it's going to look cheap, people are going to be like, whatever. And even if they don't know why they're dismissing it, your brain knows, even if you don't know, like this is just kind of a bit shit. So,
it is a fact of the human brain that, we have this is a usability slide, but, people assume that products that look better are easier to use. For example, like the perception is more important often than reality. And
here's just one last little anecdote. Like we talk to each other, we have a good chat every week for 2 hours. and we have our they're nice-ish, like USB microphones plugged in. But what I did notice once was we'd been talking and having a good chat, and then we, like, later that day did, like, FaceTimed. It was such a more frustrating, worse conversation because the audio quality was a bit shit. It was like, I feel like I'm not talking to you in the same way because the sound is just kind of a bit muffled, a bit compressed, a bit awful. And I don't know, it's like that clarity is something that makes a big difference.
It does interrupt. I yesterday, my friend and I had this nice chat with. We resorted to our landlines. We just had a nice old-fashioned holding a phone that wasn't cooking your ear, not trying to see your face, but we could hear each other very well. And there was none of that. Sorry, are you still there?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Silence.
What was the last thing you heard?
Here's the last thing to talk about on this subject. And I can't remember if I said this on the podcast, but a realization I had recently was the more easily something that you've made can spread, i.e., is it an audio recording that can just be copied to 1 million computers in a fraction of a second, or is it a table that you've got to, like, put together and ship? So digital stuff is obviously it can propagate a lot faster. So the faster it can propagate, the more people you are in direct competition with.
Oh, I see.
Right. So it is a fact that if the quality of my music, if quality is a metric of music in that way, is not on a par with Kanye West's or, like Rihanna and of these records, that's who I'm in competition with.
So production quality?
Well, you're just in competition with the best musicians in the world. Because from the perception of the listener, like, it's all coming through the same way, and there's no way. So you can make something that is very good, but if it's not as good as Stevie Wonder, then it's going to struggle to compete. And so, the Facebook feed, the Twitter feed is a very, very competitive place. There's a lot of short little nuggets that can do well. You can have a tweet that does well. You can have a thing like, obviously, like, how much attention it requires is another factor in this. So 3 minutes of focused listening is a lot to ask someone these days. Horribly enough. Yeah. Whereas, like, reading 280 characters is reasonable for people to scroll through a few of those and find a few. But you've really got to think, like, this isn't just you and your friends anymore. This isn't just you and your town. This is you versus the best people at this in the world.
Wow.
So that's tough.
That is tough. Damn it.
So that's why, we kind of entered that British podcast thing and, like, let's get a people's vote. And then it's like, who won the people's vote? Mark Kermode and Simon Mayo. Oh, right. Veteran radio presenters on the BBC for decades. All right, okay. And as far as a podcast listener is concerned, we're the same.
Yeah.
Like, it's just as easy for their content to reach them as it is for our content. So that's tough. So either you've got to really find your niche that there is less competition in, or find some angle where you're doing something less scalable as part of that, if that makes sense. Like, so something I was thinking, like, maybe for my music Patreon, maybe I have a tier which is I will help you with your project. So there's only one of me But like, and actually that's some advice given to a lot of startups now. Like you look at Y Combinator, they're telling people, don't start from scalability, start from actually like do a lot of work, make it unscalable, because it's going to put life into something that it couldn't have if everything was immediately kind of massively automated.
But I mean, your video, there can't be that's got to be a niche, surely.
Oh yeah, well, and I'm sort of like standing on Graham's shoulders with that as well, obviously. And a separate point that I was thinking was, like, if you do want to do something that is a bit different, I think this idea of synthesizing two things is a better way of creating something different than having a lot of different things in a big melting pot. So that for me was, I've taken two things. I've taken mechanical techno, which I like the rhythms that it creates, but I also like modular synths, and I kind of want something small and portable. And you just kind of, that's two things combined. It's very easy to see, kind of like understand all the angles of it in a way that if you kind of have something with more inspirations and with more kind of like prerequisites from a lot more different spheres, then it's going to be a lot harder to make something appealing, maybe. But yeah, we can find niches by taking two things and joining them together, which is why like a new genre is generally, techno exists as a genre. So now we can say industrial techno. So people already know what those two things are. And now you've got a thing that people can sort of like internalize, and then you can make that what it is. Like, I don't know if that kind of pertains to the point, but in terms of finding a niche, I suppose is what I'm saying there.
I think perhaps the message that's missing is a persistence message.
Well, yes,
which is a lovely word at the moment. It's a word of the moment, and yet she persisted. It's like, but there is a persistence thing. If you truly want to achieve something, you do have to keep at it. There's no, like the consistency is the manifestation of persistence.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, for example, if this podcast never reaches millions and millions of people, it's doing me good. It's making me think harder. And, I'm okay with investing hours every week.
A couple of billable hours.
A day of billable hours a week in being better. So, and if it has a knock-on effect of making more people better, then it will,
well, we hope there's snowball effect.
If it has a snowball effect, great. That would be a bigger reward for me. But, I feel it makes me feel better knowing that I'm trying to be better, and that I've got to come in and talk to you and what have you done? Nothing. Oh yeah. I'm really looking forward to my scores. I really am.
There we go. And just to add to that, something that can be very difficult and something that I have struggled with for my entire adult life is, what is something that I want to persist at? Because when you're interested in a lot of different things, like what is something that is going to day to day give me something back and also kind of help me kind of achieve some of my more ambitious goals. So this podcast is a great example of something that I get so much out of, so much focus, so much like, I don't know, I'm just like learning things and kind of expanding my ways of thinking about things every week. We know what it is. It has a structure that we can just keep going on and be persistent with. It's a lot of work, but it's self-sustaining enough that it's, I'm not like, it doesn't feel like it's taking away from anything.
No.
Whereas, artistically, I've never quite been sure where I want to focus my efforts, because I'm interested in a lot of things. I just want to learn how to, but sometimes picking any one thing to double down on is as good as choosing the right thing to double down on.
Yeah.
And because then you give it a proper shrift, you sort of start to unpick some of the details of it. And any idea you have, if you start doing it every week, every month, you're going to start to find the depth in it and develop skills, develop habits around it. So I think even like keeping score of our good deeds is going to help kind of exercise a certain way of looking at things that I think is going to lead to good things.
And we're going to give it a try.
Yes. So hopefully that was useful, and thanks for listening.
Thank you very much for listening.
If you like the podcast, go to grahampodcast.com, or you can email us hello@grahampodcast.com with your scores or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. Or tweet us, Podcast Grand, or tweet me at Ivanka.
Or you can find me at michaelforestmusic.com, and all my links are in there. And just generally, is there anything else?
Yeah, please write us some reviews. Please. That'd be really useful. On the subject of engagement.
Please engage with us.
Being able to compete with everybody else in the world, ratings and reviews do help. So if you could take a moment to just go and stick some stars on this episode if you've listened to it, or the podcast overall, or whatever, any effort would be gratefully received.
Thank you, and thank you so much for the people that have.
Thank you.
And the people that I will not thank you in advance, because that is an obnoxious thing to do. I will thank you next week.
Oh.
After you've done it. Don't you hate that?
Do you know when you once, I was writing some email at work and you put somebody had written to you and they'd put thanks, and he's like, I haven't done it yet. and now every time at the end of an email I go to write thanks, I'm like, no, Michael's right. There's much of my life. There's a couple of things that I do where I've got like a Michael in the back of my head going, is that really what you want to do?
Oh, God. Well, I'm sorry for that spectre.
Years of it accumulated. I also have a little Greta Thunberg as well now.
Let's get our voices in the back of more people's heads.
Yes.
We'll profit. All right. Thanks for listening. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.